This morning, we read of the original sin of the Jewish people, the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. As Jack spoke about earlier, Moses has been up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, which means that the Israelites had neither seen nor heard from Moses, their leader, their prophet, the person who tangibly connected them with God, for well over a month. And so they become frantic. They panic. They are terrified that both God and Moshe have abandoned them. And in their state of panic, they ask Aaron, Moses' brother and second in command, to build them an idol, a golden calf, something physical, something tangible, something that would never abandon them. And our tradition frames this incident as the great sin in the history of the Jewish people. No sooner had God given us the 10 Commandments, including the prohibition against idolatry, than our ancestors were breaking those commandments. And it's really the low point of our history, a moment in which our ancestors demonstrated a profound lack of patience, a lack of reverence, and most of all, a lack of faith in God. But let's take a step back for a moment and think about why the Israelites felt so compelled to build the golden calf. And the answer, of course, the answer that so many commentators give, is because they were afraid. And who can blame them? God had taken them out of Egypt with a yad chazaka, uzro netuyah, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Moses had led them across the sea, but now both God and Moshe had seemingly disappeared. They were without a leader, without a God, and they were staring into the abyss, into the unknown. They didn't know what was going to happen to them next, and they were terrified. And this year in particular, I think we can all relate to what our ancestors were feeling at the moment that they committed the sin of the golden calf. Because, as we know far too well, since October 7th, we have all been feeling unmoored. We've all been staring into the abyss, into the unknown. Just as our ancestors felt when they stood at the foot of the mountain waiting for Moses to come back down, at this moment we too are living in a constant state of existential dread. And after October 7th, there were some things that we definitively knew. We knew we were suffering. We knew anger. We knew grief. And most significantly, we knew that our collective Jewish spirit would never be broken. But 5 months after that terrible day, there are still so many things that we don't know. We don't even know who will ultimately be fighting in this war. For now, at this moment, our enemy is clear. We're at war with Hamas. But at what point will Israel send ground troops into Lebanon to actively fight Hezbollah? Will the Houthis or Syria or Iran ever really join this war in earnest? We know how the war started and who our enemy is now, but we have no idea how this war is going to end or even who we will ultimately be fighting down the road. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in Gaza. At this moment, right now, 2 things are currently happening with the war, and they are happening simultaneously. First, as I'm sure you've all been reading about, Israel is preparing to invade Rafah, the final stronghold of Hamas, where 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are currently living. And the question of whether or not Israel should invade Rafah is a very complicated question. Because on the one hand, invading Rafah seems inevitable. After many months of fighting, we have finally got Hamas cornered and victory seems within reach, and we need to invade Rafah to do what needs to be done to finish this war. But, on the other hand, 1.5 million Palestinians are currently living in Rafah. And if Israel invades Rafah, there could be tens of thousands of more Palestinian casualties, and Israel could lose the support of its final remaining allies in the international community, allies that Israel desperately needs. And while this decision about invading Rafah is being weighed, Israel is also in the midst of serious ceasefire discussions. Tomorrow, both Israel and Hamas will be sending delegations to Cairo to continue discussing the details of a ceasefire deal, which we hope and we pray will include the release of all of the remaining hostages. And it's very possible, it's not likely, but it's possible that by the time that our TBS mission lands in Israel on Monday morning, a ceasefire deal could already be in effect. And we pray that all of the hostages will come home as part of that deal. But all of that is theoretical. At this moment right now, nothing is clear. Will Israel invade Rafah or not? Will there be a ceasefire or not? Will we ever see the hostages again? Will Rachel Goldberg, the mother of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was abducted at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th, ever be able to hug her son again? I don't know. No one knows the answers to those questions. And like our ancestors standing at the foot of Sinai, wondering whether or not Moses would ever come back down that mountain, we too are staring into the unknown. But there's one thing I do know. I do know that I and all of us here who live in this town are deeply, deeply blessed to live in a town like Livingston. As many of you here know, this past Tuesday there was a very important Board of Education meeting here in Livingston. And the major topic of discussion at that meeting was an event that was slated to take place on Wednesday, this past Wednesday. Our Greater Metro West Federation is currently hosting a delegation of survivors from October 7th, and those survivors were slated to speak to Livingston High School students at an optional program this past Wednesday evening. And not surprisingly, late last week, we learned that a number of local anti-Israel groups would be attending the Board of Education meeting on Tuesday to speak out against the Federation holding this program for Livingston High School students on Wednesday. And so very quickly and very successfully, the Jewish community here in Livingston mobilized. Between 400 and 500 Jewish Livingston residents attended the Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, including many, many Temple Beth Shalom members, some of whom are here with us this morning. And it was exhilarating to be in that room. And our TBS members spoke so passionately and so beautifully at that meeting on Tuesday night. You spoke about your Zionism, you spoke about your love of Israel and the Jewish people. And most importantly, you spoke about the profound significance of allowing Jewish voices, especially voices coming from survivors of October 7th, to be heard at a moment like this in our history. I don't know how this war is going to end. I don't know when this war is going to end. I don't know if we are ever going to see the hostages again. But I do know that I have never been as proud to live in this town or to be the rabbi of this congregation as I was on Tuesday night. When our ancestors committed the sin of the golden calf, God referred to us as Am Kshei Oref, as a stiff-necked people, a stubborn people. We're not an easy people to deal with. And believe me, God didn't mean it as a compliment. But in the year 2024, I am proud, extremely proud, to be a member of Am Kshei Oref, of the stiff-necked Jewish people. Because it is precisely our stiff-necked nature that has allowed us to survive and to thrive for thousands of years. As history has proven, our stiff-necked nature, that's not our tragic flaw, but rather it's our noble and maybe our key defining characteristic. And it is because of our stiff-necked nature that we will continue to survive for thousands of years still to come. I may not know how or when this war will end, but I do know that. Shabbat Shalom. We turn to page 4.